So I like Battleship, but I also like history. I realized that the game Battleship is not very historically accurate. So my solution is Vaguely Historically Accurate Battleship. Vaguely Historically Accurate Battleship is a working two-player game Battleship with all the features you would expect. It accounts for all reasonable user inputs that may cause crashes. The code is easily built upon, can be improved on, and feature-wise, it has multiple selectable factions at the game start that apply different bonuses to gameplay. As I began to work on version 1, I started coding the very basics of Battleship, which is the board. This is a NumPy array because NumPy arrays are easier to iterate across in 2 dimensions. The next basic piece of Battleship is what a shot is. Now a shot I broke down into 2 different functions. The first function is the square selection function. It prompts a letter column input and a number row input, maps that to a square on the board, and simply returns the contents of that square. The next part is to, of course, evaluate what the shell has hit. A separate function takes in the square input, determines what is on the square on the board, prints out the famous A1 is a hit or A3 is a miss message, and then changes the tile to a shot marker. Newer versions do actually have a case where the square is one you've already fired upon. The code will then berate you for wasting a shot, and this has been determined to be a feature. Now, code has been written to test out alternating turns of firing shots, but there are no ships to shoot at and blow up. So we move on to the ship placement function. It starts with a simple 5-ship reserve, which is a list that has all of the ships that you can place down. It starts off as an array, but lists were easier to work with. The ship placement function asks the player to choose the size of the ship from the reserve. It asks the player to choose the starting point and, of course, the orientation. And then it runs a lot of tests to determine if there is enough space. If there's space, ship gets placed down. If there's no space, it sends the user back to the start to try to do the whole thing again. As version 1 wraps up, I had to figure out how to create a wind state. So it starts off with a variable called fleet power. It's simply a way to measure the number of ship tiles you have that have not been hit. At the end of a turn, it checks if it ever reaches 0, and if it does, it triggers a victory message for that player's opponent. Vaguely Historically Accurate Battleship has no way to keep track of individual ship sinkings because that turned out to be difficult, and I am also selling this as a feature. With the ship placement and the shots and the wind state, version 1 was completed, creating a fully functioning game of Battleship. With the core mechanics of the game completed, the UI needed some work. In the console system, it was hard to keep the anonymity of where you'd place your ships, and I figured instead of rewriting this, it was best to just switch to the proper PyPlot-based graphics system. A new function is then written, placed inside the actual printing function for the boards, that instead of printing whatever tile is on, draws a rectangle onto a plot depending on the tile. Then the row and column headers are, as well as the title, are simply made with built-in PyPlots, X-ticks, and Y-ticks. I did want to try to use external graphics. They proved extremely difficult as well because of the way coordinates seems to work, and I was rapidly running out of time, so we are stuck with rectangles, unfortunately. The plot was then broken up into 2 subplots, one for the board where you see your ships, and one for the radar where you see the shots you've taken, and little start turn and in-between turn screens were made to act as privacy shields for players as they switch turns. With the graphics, version 2 has been completed, and version 3 can start, which is, of course, one of the primary goals, the faction system. I figured that it'd be really easy to just vary the number of attacks that a certain faction gets in one turn. So a variable is made that's calculated at the start of every turn for the number of attacks a player can get, and the shot function in the game turn is looped around that many times. Factions also modify which ships are available to place at the game start, just to add to the flavor and to represent the various different shipbuilding doctrines present in the 20th century. The factions are chosen through a console prompt at the start of the game, where players can input a specific faction code that is given to them, but that allows them to play a certain faction. And with that, Vaguely Historically Accurate Battleship is complete. Battleship is ultimately a project of manipulating NumPy arrays and grids, and I did learn a lot about all the ways that you can change them, the ways you can check them, and all the many if statements and match cases and for loops proved to be very useful and very enjoyable to code and think through.